There's a long poke in the deep right center field. Way back, way back. Piersall leaping up. And he's laughing with a home run. Going high in the air out there in the Red Sox bullpen. Another sensational catch by Piersall.
Jimmy Piersall was pretty near as good as you'd want to get in the outfield in the big leagues. He was an excellent fielder.
He was outspoken. He was emotional. He was very aggressive. And he was fearless.
If you were a reporter and you needed somebody to fill your notebook after a game, Piersall was your first stop in the clubhouse.
There was always an element of danger about him, which I suppose made him fascinating on one hand, but also made you want to leave the room on the other.
He was crazy, and you never knew what he would bring to the game. You had this singularly captivating guy in center field with a personal history that was certainly out of the ordinary.
In spring training of 1952, Jimmy Piersall was already a subject of discussion on the Red Sox.
I'd heard about him when he was playing with Scranton, that he was an outstanding center fielder, and that he was going to take my place when the time came.
When I was a kid, I was always a Red Sox fan. Jimmy Fox, Bobby Doerr, and Ted Williams I idolized as a hitter. Then all of a sudden, the biggest thrill of my life was to be able to make the Red Sox.
That thrill was to turn into a nightmare. Hints of trouble were revealed before opening day when manager Lou Boudreau moved his high-strung rookie to shortstop.
He was a center fielder, but we had a center fielder, Dom DiMaggio, and he really didn't want to play shortstop.
I didn't like the idea because I had made an all-star team in the minor leagues, and now all of a sudden here I am going to have to learn something new all over again.
He had the feeling that they didn't want him. They were trying to put him in a position which he wasn't qualified to play. He couldn't understand that. After all the priming and the outstanding success he had in the minors, they finally brought him up, and here he was being asked to play shortstop.
I did what they wanted, and I kept saying to myself, boy, I hate it.
He had his own nervous problems at the time, and I think that extra pressure on him caused him to crack up.
On May 24th, Piersall matched his temper against someone of equal volatility.
He taunted Billy Martin one day when the Yankees were taking fielding practice. And Martin came over and beat the hell out of him in the dugout.
Billy was a terribly insecure player who always was afraid that he was going to be shipped out. And Piersall was the same way.
I was writing him from the dugout, and I guess I got a little personal.
So Jimmy, being Jimmy, he took him on, and it was right in the steps of the dugout. But it didn't last long, a couple of wild swings, and we broke it up.
Alice Kinner, the relief pitcher for the Red Sox, came along and just grabbed both of them and bumped their heads together. And that was the end of it.
But it wasn't. Piersall then unleashed his anger on a teammate.
I got in a fight with him. They knocked him into a locker, and I went to Boudreau. I said, let us tell you something, pal. There's something wrong here with this kid.
He used to keep candy bars up in his locker, Hershey bars, for energy. They stole all his candy bars out of his box, and he come in and he asked me who did it, who took them. And I couldn't tell him, and I said, I don't know. Geez, he got me in a corner, and he's hitting me left and right.
If he had a good day, he was on top of the world. If he had a bad day, he was lying on the floor. If anything went wrong in the clubhouse, it was almost as if he were a nervous wreck.
Most of Piersall's early days were subpar. He committed 9 errors in 30 games at short, and he wasn't doing much better at the plate. In an effort to settle him down, he was moved back to the outfield. Still, the rookie acted strangely.
I saw him one day when he climbed the backstop. He crawled all the way up that backstop and told the people to cheer.
Fans behind home plate were getting on him and taunting him. He knew he couldn't do anything, but as a way of getting back at him, he ran right toward the screen behind home plate and started climbing up the screen as if to say, I'm coming after you. Well, he wasn't going after anybody. He was just saying, you better leave me alone.
A lot of guys on the team thought that this was really a good show. I'm not sure that they were convinced that Piersall was nuts. I think they felt he was doing exactly what he wanted to do, to get the attention that he wanted.
He wanted the spotlight. He wanted to be the showman. He wanted to be everything.
The St. Louis Browns came to Boston for a night game, and old Satchel Paige came in relief.
I got a base hit off of Satchel. I bunted, beat it out, and then I was imitating his delayed motion when I was on first base.
And then Piersall got on second and halfway stood on his head and, yeah, you're going out, yeah, all kinds of faces.
He's like scratching himself and like it was an ape or something.
I said, there's something wrong with that kid. I said, that's not Jimmy Piersall that I knew.
I became physically and mentally tired, worried about the fact that, you know, I wasn't hitting as good. I had gotten out of hand as far as my not being able to calm me down.
On June 28th, Piersall was sent down to AAA Birmingham, where it was hoped he would collect himself.
It was the only thing they possibly could do at the time to settle him down, and he went down there, and we heard some strange stories there, too.
The umpire calls him out on a bad third strike. So he didn't say a word. He just stood there, reached in his back pocket, and come out with a water pistol, went pew. The umpire hurled, he fainted dead away.
Went up on top of the stands, and all he had on was a jockstrap. And, you know, the fans were going crazy. They're pointing up at the stands, and the umpires, they wouldn't let him play the second ball game.
Mr. Yockey invited me back into his little restaurant bar there. He said, Piersall just squirted home plate with a water pistol as he crossed the plate, and he's putting the numbers up on the scoreboard. We got to get him out of there, and he belongs in a hospital.
In mid-July, Piersall was scheduled to undergo psychiatric testing. His stay was short.
They tried to put me into a small sanitarium, and I ran away. I had just gotten so wound up that I lost all control over my memory.
Days later, Piersall woke up in what was called the violent room of the Westboro State Hospital.
I think I was the only guy who went out to see him. We sat on one of the open porches that they have there, and we just sat around in a rocking chair and chatted for about an hour. And when I got back, they surrounded me, the sports writers, and said, well, what do you think?
It was always a little difficult for him to control himself, and until they came up with lithium to treat manic depressives, he really struggled. But once he got on some lithium, he became much more in control of things.
He also had electric shock treatments. It's sort of like a vegetable at first.
He talked to me about the shock treatments that he went through and what medication he had to take. And if he did not take his medication, or, you know, he'd just go off.
And I was worried sick, because I didn't know when I come out of the hospital whether I could catch the ball, whether I could throw the ball, whether I could play, or how are people going to receive me. Most writers said I'd never play again in Boston. They said that I didn't have a chance.
From 9 to 11, movies for sports fans, only on ESPN Classic.
Jimmy Piersall was born in Waterbury, Connecticut on November 14th, 2 weeks after the 1929 Wall Street crash.
During the Depression, it was kind of sad, you know, to see so many people who were unemployed. There was, at the golf lots, what they call shantytown, and many people lived there who were unemployed.
I didn't realize that there was a depression, because I was in playing sports, all kinds. We either playing across the street, through alleyways where we played stickball.
We developed a game where we used bottle caps. You'd pitch to bottle caps. Of course, you could do a lot of things with bottle caps, you could curve them and everything else. And we used to play with them and use a broomstick to see if you could hit them.
Buoyed by dreams of Major League stardom, Piersall practiced tirelessly at nearby Hamilton Park.
It seemed like he was always there, chasing fly balls. And if anybody came out to the park, he would say, hit me some fly balls. Hit me some fly balls. We just spent hours and hours.
Once a ball was hit, he could get it. I don't think there was a ball that they could hit in Hamilton Park that he couldn't catch.
He was just aggressive. He was a lad out there that seemed to stand out the minute he got on that field. He had a lot of pep, fire.
He played very hard, and he worked hard at perfecting the game even further. Of course, he also had his father who was constantly coaching him, urging Jim to excel.
On or off the baseball field, life under the exacting hand of John Piersall was never easy.
Dad was a house painter, and it didn't always work because there wasn't always work.
I knew that when his father said something had to be done, Jim made sure it was done. If it was being home at a precise time, Jim was there. I never did get the feeling that he was terrified, but I certainly got the opinion and the feeling that he made sure that he didn't cross his father.
He was a normal father who was very intense on making me take care of myself. Then when I got in high school, he was a little tougher because he wanted me to be a good player, wouldn't let me play football.
The father wouldn't allow him to play, and Jim was playing, and he did get hurt. And of course, he was terrified of what would happen coming home. First thing the father would say, there goes your baseball career.
The feeling was this is just a father who knew his kid was talented and wanted him to make the big time.
While his father pushed him to excel, Jimmy's mother, Mary, was less accessible. She suffered from severe depression.
She seemed very reserved and very quiet, as if she was rather withdrawn, and she would be away at times in an institution.
My mom, God love her, worked in a rectory for the priests. She made linens, she washed linens. She was a very quiet lady, very religious.
He thought that his dad could be more supportive of her rather than being his strong, forceful self.
Despite his grim home life, Piersall rose to captain of Leavenworth High's baseball and basketball teams.
I think by playing basketball, it helped my quickness. Learning how to be on your toes, learning how to anticipate, learning how to concentrate.
He had a knack to size up a situation on the board so he can get into a position to get that ball.
Very aggressive. Any rebound was his. His mind was intent on scoring, driving to the hoop, being aggressive.
He was high-strung in high school. He had to be the star, I know that.
Usually he was. Scoring 29 points, Piersall led his team to the New England High School Championship.
Jimmy was our go-to guy, and he was having an exceptional game. Jimmy, in most cases, threw the shot and followed his own. A couple of times, I think he got the rebound and put it back in.
One of my friends said he was sitting by a scout, and the scout asked him, could I play baseball? And he said he plays baseball better than he does basketball. So that really helped. The Red Sox got interested in me.
There was never a question in the father's mind that Jimmy wasn't going to be with the Red Sox.
True to his father's and his own wishes, Piersall signed with the Red Sox in 1947. Neither father nor son had an income.
There weren't a lot of people around then, never mind professional athletes, who would be incarcerated in a state mental institution and go on to a more productive life after that. He went on to play Major League Baseball. He was huge. In his own way, he was as big a star in the 50s as was Ted Williams.
He certainly was a popular player when he played for the Red Sox in the early 1950s. The breakdown and his ability to come back from that is something that fans can relate to and has increased his popularity.
The story itself has always gripped me, of the way he is driven to the point of madness and then is able to fight his way back.
In 1953, his first season back, Piersall batted .272 and led up the American League with his fielding, making just 5 errors in 151 games.
Piersall was a genius as an outfielder. At the crack of the bat, he knew right where to go now.
Boy, what an outfielder that kid is. He's got to be one of the greats of all time.
He was one of the few center fielders that I saw who played shallow. He said, there are more balls hit in front of me than there are behind me.
Nobody went back on a ball any better than me. Nobody, because I practiced so much.
He played that fence as good as anybody ever played that fence out there. He'd go out there every day and work balls coming off the fence.
The flagpole used to be uncovered, so the ball could go around behind the flagpole. I remember one time him jumping up and pulling himself up on the flagpole to make a catch.
The one catch I remember he made was off Mickey Mantle with the bases loaded in Fenway Park. He ran to that wall, climbed right up that wall and grabbed the ball and then crashed into the wall and fell to the ground. Casey Stengel, the manager of the Yankees, who'd seen baseball for 900 years, said that's the greatest single catch he ever saw in his life.
He wasn't afraid of the wall. You know, he wouldn't shy away from crashing into the green monster out there, leaning over the bullpen. He was a tough, courageous baseball player.
They had a contest in Boston one time. Piersall was going to throw from the outfield with Willie Mays. Now, that's about as good as you can get.
Jimmy Piersall was one of the finest defensive ball players I've ever seen in my life. I didn't think he was going to hit. He didn't look like a hitter to me. It turned out to be a pretty good hitter.
He was a lot stronger than people think he was. He was turned out to be a doggone good hitter.
Swung on. There's a drive to deep right field. That ball is going down. A home run for Jimmy Piersall.
Although Piersall became a two-time All-Star and won 2 Gold Gloves, he gained a reputation not so much for what he did, but how he did it.
Out there with him, Jimmy Piersall. Jimmy, you stand up and take a bow.
Jimmy always knew where the camera was in New York. One Saturday, he had been called out on a tough play, and he got out there and he started kicking the turf, and they had to get the ground crew out there to replace the turf in center field.
Jimmy would be having a great time with the fans, and foul balls would be hit. 40 rows up in the seats, and he'd run towards the seats like he's going to climb up the stairs to go catch it.
On one occasion when I caught a ball in right center field, he came behind me and mimicked me step by step. I knew he was there.
Dominic would make a good catch in center field, a running catch, and maybe down here at the shoe top. And after he'd catch it, throw the ball in, Jimmy'd take off his glove, put it under his arm, and throw it to the stand, and give him a hand.
One night we're in Chicago. Mel Parnell was on the mound, and all we heard was, "Yay, Piersall, yay, Piersall." Parnell backed off the mound, and there's Piersall leading the crowd in cheers for himself.
At Yankee Stadium, a dispirited Piersall sought solace from a great player who happened to be on the far side of time.
We had our 4th pitcher coming in, so I sat up on the monument, and I'm talking to Babe. I said, "Babe, you're so lucky you didn't have to play on a team like this."
I was the hitter, and there wasn't a center fielder. Piersall was out behind the monuments. Then in the next couple of pitches, he was the extra infielder. He was playing behind second base.
Somebody on the Yankees hit a shot into the center field stands, and it looked as if it hit in and bounced out, and the umpires ruled it a home run. And Piersall came running in from center field with that ferocious look, just running in full tilt, pointing, yelling at the umpires and winning the argument.
The umpire called him out on strikers, called him out, and he went to center field, flagpole in Fenway Park, and he sat behind the flagpole.
Playing against Jimmy, I thought he was the rottenest ball player ever lived. I really did. I hated him.
Fear strikes out, with Anthony Perkins scoring the dramatic sensation of the year in the real-life story of young Jimmy Piersall, Major League Baseball star.
In 1957, Piersall was transformed into a national curiosity when the movie version of his autobiography, Fear Strikes Out, opened in theaters coast to coast.
That's how we all discovered Jimmy Piersall from If You Didn't Live in New England. I remember reading the book, you know, and seeing the movie. And of course, Hollywood's version of the story, you know, like most Hollywood versions of these stories, a bit bizarre.
That was ridiculous. It really made me look weird.
Anybody who's seen the movie Fear Strikes Out or indeed read the book would have to treat these antics of Piersall's very, very differently from the way they were treated in the media at the time. These were not colorful events. These are the signs of a deeply troubled guy.
Sports writers didn't write about the negative very much. It was pretty much what you did on the field. And Piersall kind of changed that a little bit. They began to look into the personal life of people a little more.
This was a period of time in our lives, in American life, when everyone had and maintained a sense of privacy. So here you had people knowing about Jimmy Piersall's personal life through the book I mean, the guy actually sits down and writes about the torment of his youth and the troubled aspects of his adolescence. It was captivating for a lot of people, and I think only added to the element of excitement that he brought to the game every Sunday.
This is ESPN Classic.
In the turbulent wake of Fear Strikes Out, Piersall felt increasing pressure from at least two fronts. At home was a wife and 6 children to support, and at work, he needed to constantly prove his worth to a skeptical Red Sox management.
We used to run into each other on a banquet circuit, and I remember him going through a little address book type thing one day, making notes, and I said, well, Jimmy, what the hell? And he said, no, I keep a record of everything I do out there on a day-to-day basis. Those SOBs, when I go in a contract, despite the fact that I'm the best defensive, they tell me how terrible I am, and I say, hey, now, what do you mean? Look at this book. That blew my mind.
After the 1958 season, Piersall was dealt to Cleveland, where he continued his antics.
Bill Vack had put up the exploding scoreboard at Comiskey Park, and when the fireworks went off after a home run by one of the White Sox, I mean, he sort of lost it. So he brought some baseballs out with him for the next half inning and peppered that scoreboard.
He scared me half to death. I would put a pickoff play on, and he turned around and started screaming at me. Don't ever put a pickoff play on Jimmy Piersall. What are you doing? Who do you think you are? And I went back to shortstop. I said, geez, I must stay away from this guy.
He always had that smile like this, and he was always kind of running in choppy steps, you know, and kind of looking around. Everything was like staccato with him.
He would do things like get in the batter's circle. The pitcher would be warming up, and he would sort of like he's going to swing. Well, the pitcher didn't like that, and they said, you better not do that anymore, or they'll throw at him in the batter's circle.
He's on deck circle, and I'm taking my warm-ups. He's just up there timing me. He's got about 4 or 5 bats in his hand. He's just timing my pitches. So I threw the ball at him. And then he threw all 5 bats out to the mound at me.
Piersall had a way of working himself up before a game. He would go into the cage and he would be muttering curses against Mickey Mantle, who was the star, and Dan Topping and Del Webb, who owned the team. And he'd be working himself into a frenzy in the batting cage.
When we were playing the Yankees a doubleheader, Merrill and Maris were going for 56, 57, whatever home runs they could get. And I had made the statement that we're going to walk them. So it was the second game of the doubleheader. And my dad had just passed away a previous 4 or 5 days. And I wasn't feeling too good. And out comes 2 kids out of the stands.
And somebody takes a swing at Piersall. 2 men take a swing at Piersall, and he goes after him.
As soon as one got near me, I knocked him down. The other one started to run away, and I kicked the guy right in the butt.
Jimmy dropped one after the other. And the Indian Ball Club got out there in a hurry.
And I think at times he felt as a player that people were still hearkening back to the time when he had the nervous breakdown. So I think he was a little bit defensive about that.
Fans in center field had been giving him a lot of grief about his past. He judged the ball, and as he looked at the flight of the ball, he turned around, and it seemed like he talked to him for minutes, but it probably was just several seconds. But he kind of laughed at him, and then he turned around and caught the last out of the game and ran off the field.
People come to see entertainment, and baseball can be very dull. There's not too many players can entertain.
I remember him coming to the bat here and coming up to the plate and singing, I got the whole world in my hand, I got the... He's hitting off of Milt Pappas, and he's singing while he's at the plate.
Despite finishing 3rd in the American League batting race with a .322 average in 1961, Piersall was shipped out to Washington at the end of the season. A year and a half later, he was unloaded on the Mets and their 72-year-old manager, Casey Stengel.
Piersall treaded on Casey's thunder and would tell Casey stories. And you didn't tell Casey stories. You worked for Mr. Stengel, and you didn't tell stories about him sleeping on the bench or funny antics that he did. You didn't tell on him. You let the writers tell on him.
He and Casey did not get along. We once talked to him after a game. You know, tabloid reporters were just trying to stir the pot. And we tried to get him to talk about Casey. He tells a good story, he says. You know how a lot of old people tell the same stories over and over? Casey doesn't do that. Not too often.
Jimmy came up to me, he says, you didn't get much coverage for your
400th home run. He says, I'll tell you what, I've got 99. When I get my 100th, I'll get more ink than you got for your 400th.
A fly ball hit right down the right field line. If it stays fair, it might do it. Let's watch. Home run for Jimmy Piersall. Piersall is running the bases backwards.
And he jogged backwards all the way around the bases, first, second, third, into home, coming in backwards, standing up, and the crowd, there were maybe 15 or 20,000 people in Polo Grounds, giving him a standing ovation and being absolutely hysterical.
Jimmy Piersall has said that when he hit home run number 100 in the major leagues, he was going to run the bases backwards, and he's doing it.
I thought Richie Ashburn, who was a pretty loose, easygoing guy, would absolutely die. And I can remember him saying to me as Piersall was going backwards around the bases, this guy's always been a screwball, and he always will be a screwball.
I thought it was kind of a showboat type of thing, but we hadn't been clowns up until that point. Now we're clowns, or an act.
The next morning, I figure I'm going to get some ink on this. So I wake up early, and I go to get the papers. So I take it to the ballpark. He says, so I told you, Duke, I'm going coast to coast. Now, you watch Johnny Carson tonight. I'll be on with Zaza Gabor. I got released 3 days later. Casey didn't like my act.
Next stop was the Los Angeles Angels, where Hollywood and television beckoned.
There he is, Mom. Jimmy Piersall.
Jerry, do you play ball?
Only in the Little League. Once he pitched a no-hitter.
Yeah, what was the score?
8-0.
Nice. Win.
We lost.
When he was with the Angels, just about everyone was crazy. It was such a terrible ball club that I guess his behavior became more the norm than something we'd say was outrageous.
He was the kind of guy who played to the fans and for the fans, and he had a flair about him, let's put it that way. I think a lot of the fans came out to see Jimmy Piersall.
He just had so much charisma, and he was a fun-loving guy, and that showed the expression and the feeling and the emotion that there is in the game.
In 1968, Piersall, now the father of 9, divorced his wife Mary and began an odyssey into the peripheries of the game.
Jimmy Piersall, a gentleman with a very colorful past, became a broadcaster for Charlie Finley for 2 seasons. But his more prominent role was probably as a gopher for Charlie.
As it turns out, he was like a flunky. But I assumed that Piersall would also be joining us for lunch. Well, it turns out that Piersall was actually serving us lunch.
He had some falling out with Charlie, and Charlie fired him, and I managed to catch up with Piersall sort of on his way out the door, and I said, you know, what's going on, Jimmy? And he goes, you know, I'll tell you about Charlie Finley. If he was walking down the street and his eyeball fell out of his socket and was rolling down the hill, I would kick it.
In 1977, Piersall learned the White Sox were seeking a broadcast partner for Harry Carey.
They were auditioning people in different cities to be an analyst. And I figured, well, what a nice chance. I didn't care because I didn't think I'd get the job. I'm needling Harry, and they liked it.
Hey, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Can you lend me about $1,000? Hey, how's your alimony payment coming? I never miss one. Can you say that?
They were way ahead of their time. And if they were on today, in their prime, they would be just tremendously popular.
I never walked up to the plate thinking home run. Making contact was my motto.
Well, you only finished 635 behind Babe Ruth.
They had fun together. Yeah, they worked well as a combo as far as they were concerned. It's just that sometimes the players took a beating.
Piersall was very critical, extremely critical, which got to some of the players.
Boy, Harry, that's terrible. And the kind of bread he's making, he's going to run in that play.
The fans ate him up. I think he was one of the reasons the White Sox had a following.
He brought his opinions to the booth, and Jimmy was not without intelligence. I mean, he was a sharp guy.
He is just stinking up the joint, and can't blame me or the fans. He is just not a center fielder, and he don't belong out there.
I'd have players sometimes come in to me and say, Roland, please trade me. I can't stand it, you know. And my wife's so upset that I want out.
Every visiting club would between innings, run up and watch the TV monitor and listen to Jimmy and Harry rip the White Sox players. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was the hatchet was not big enough.
I do remember coming into the clubhouse during the announcing of the lineups, and I was listening to him, and he was announcing our lineup by salaries. That's the first time I'd ever heard that.
Jim Piersall walked up, and he was going to do an interview or something, or just, you know, talk with me a little bit, and I turned around and I said, "Hey, crazy man, how you doing?" And I stuck my hand like that, and he looked at me, and he went, and he put his hand down, he turned around, and he just kind of walked away. And I went, "Oh, no, what did I say?"
If Piersall was sensitive about being called crazy, he could be equally insensitive in the booth.
There was a pop-up to second base, and one of the Yankee players at the time, we were very good Yankee teams, was a Latin player, and he kind of circled the ball, circled it 2 or 3 times, and finally the ball dropped behind him. Jimmy says, "Well, Harry, you know, those Latin players, they can't catch pop-ups anyway." He says, "It's on the air." And I said, to the guys, I said, "What did he say? Did he really say that?"
I don't think Jimmy can help himself. He's just going to let it rip no matter where he is. He needs that 10-second delay button. And even then, that probably wouldn't help him. Maybe a 10-day delay.
There's no filtering system with Jimmy Piersall. He will tell you what's on his mind 24 hours of every day.
I don't know how many times I heard Jimmy say, "Well, I can run faster than that guy can run," or "I can hit better than that guy can hit," and he's up in the booth.
You know, let me tell you, I could have bunted that ball with a broom. What you do is you turn around, you put the bat on here like a gun.
It meant getting on TV with a broom, showing whoever would watch how to bunt. He should bunt with a broom, or how he should go after a fly ball. He would do it.
No one ever said a word to me about that, except Ralph Garr. And Ralph had a terrible time in the outfield. And one day I said to Harry, "Every ball that goes to left field is an adventure." And he came up to me next day by the cage, and he started saying, "Did you ever make an error?" I said, "Well, I fielded 997, and he walked away from me."
Piersall's shotgun candor exploded when he leveled his sights at the wife of White Sox owner Bill Veeck.
Jimmy Piersall had been relentless in attacking my mother. He called her a colossal bore. He said that she ought to stay in the kitchen. And I just thought that enough was enough. He was always making just, I think, terribly unkind comments. And so I went after him.
I remember the night that Jimmy tried to strangle a sports writer named Rob Gallus. The White Sox pitching coach, Dave Duncan, literally had to pry Piersall's hands off the guy's throat.
Treated for exhaustion at Illinois Masonic Hospital following the scuffles with Mike Veeck and the reporter, Piersall then went on a brief leave of absence before rejoining Carey in the booth. 6 months later, Bill Veeck sold the team.
They were the only asset, I'll tell you that, because Bill Veeck didn't have any money, and we didn't have any players, and they were the show.
Problem was, it caused the conflict, was that the station in Chicago was promoting Harry Carey and Jim Piersall, and not the White Sox. And Tony La Russa, Jim Leland, and the rest of the staff resented that a little bit.
All of a sudden, here's La Russa coming in with Leland and Charlie Lau to harass me down at the station. Leland was so mad, he was having a bag. He tore his shirt off coming at me.
There was a bad incident last night between Sox manager Tony La Russa and announcer Jimmy Piersall. La Russa, upset with some of Piersall's criticisms, took 2 of his coaches, Jim Leland and Art Kushner, and actually went to the Sports Vision studios to accost Piersall.
You couldn't blame Tony La Russa and the coaching staff and the players at times to want to defend themselves, because they were at the mercy of being scrutinized or comments being made that really were uncalled for.
Late in the 1981 season, Piersall crossed the line again, this time on a local TV show with newspaper columnist Mike Royko.
He said to me, "How about these wives trying to get you fired?" Because they were going to sponsors trying to get us fired. And that's when I made the statement that I call them horny broads. And that didn't go over too well.
I remember the horny broad thing. I think I was in the clubhouse at the time and heard that, and you just kind of like, wow,
It's almost you had to think for a minute. Did I just hear what I think I heard?
Needless to say, we had a total revolt on our hands when I got there. And I talked to Jerry about it, and I said, well, we're going to have to do something about it.
When Jimmy Piersall was threatened with being fired, which happened quite often, and finally was fired, I wrote columns in his favor, because for one important reason, because he was part of the greatest broadcasting team in the history of Chicago.
What Frankie tells me, so it seems kind of strange that when I read the letters my fans send from afar, they say, please, Jamie Piersall, just stay the way you are.
When we return, we'll sum up Jimmy Piersall's life on the edge.
Number 37, the pride of Waterbury, Connecticut, Jimmy Piersall.
Piersall married his third wife, Jan. The next year, he was fired by the White Sox. Then in 1986, Piersall resurfaced as a minor league outfield instructor for the Cubs.
I think that he was one of the best teachers because he was so verbal and so animated. One of the best teachers of the art of playing the outfield that I've ever heard.
I spent 14 pretty good years working with the kids. The greatest thing I've ever done in my life was to help the kids be successful in our game.
But occasionally, Piersall's dark side comes out to play.
I was with Piersall at the Chicago Cubs fantasy camp. Jimmy was managing a team, and there was a woman playing on that team, and she made a couple of errors in the field. And Jimmy went after her verbally with such a viciousness that it shocked everybody.
Jimmy quite often will do things and say things that are contradictory. He'll do things to get into an organization, and then he'll say things to get himself right out of the organization, to undermine the exact thing that he is part of.
The Cubs fired Piersall in 1999 for saying something they judged to be inappropriate, but he remains in the public consciousness. As host of his Chicago-based radio show, he can say almost anything he wants, and often does.
I want to tell you, I got suspended for 3 days for just holding the bat on my shoulder, arguing with the umpire behind the plate. The third base umpire came up. Yeah. I let the bat go, and he fell on his ass. That cost me 3 days.
In the firings, both with the White Sox and the Cubs, whatever he has said that's been brash or off the cuff or spontaneous, it only reflects his opinion. It's never from the point of view of a bad heart.
He was the kind of fellow that when he put that uniform on, he wanted everybody to see him. When he got on that field, you're watching number 37.
I was warming up with Ted, and one of the ushers said, Mrs. Roos would like to see you. And I walked over and I said, Mrs. Roos, it's a pleasure to meet you. She said, I just wanted to tell you, Jim, the babe would have loved to watch you play. Boy, I mean, like, that's my Hall of Fame.
He was colorful out there in the field. He was colorful the way he played, the way he talked, some of his antics on the field.
One of the things that we as baseball writers and fans have done that I find absolutely appalling is the creation of this word colorful. Jimmy Piersall is always described as colorful, when Jimmy Piersall was seriously emotionally disturbed.
Anybody who lives with somebody who is a diagnosed bipolar knows that you have things to handle. There are times when it's not so easy. But those are not the times you're going to dwell on or remember. You remember the good things. And there are more good things in times than bad.
He was a character in the game that does not come along very often. He had no reservations. He was Jimmy Piersall. He was himself. He was his own man.
He was like an institution. He had been in an institution, then he became an institution. It's a logical progression.
I always say going nuts was the best thing that happened to me. I got recognition. I sort of learned more about myself. And in the overall picture, you know, people always say, he's goofy, he's wacky, you know. Like my teammates used to give me that shot. But then all of a sudden, I started making money. Once you start making money, you're no longer wacko. You're dumb like a fox.
He had, at one level, the courage to commit to paper something significant about his life. And perhaps in coming forward at a very dark and private time in American life, the 50s, I think he probably helped people cope with the fact
that they might have mental illness, and help society at large understand that, you know, mental illness is an illness, and if you confront it and deal with it, you can survive, you can prosper, you can lead a productive life, and he certainly did.
He managed to channel what were many of his anxieties, many of his psychological problems into a much more positive, upbeat persona. And of course, he was then able to parlay this into an announcing career. So Piersall, I think, while many people remember him because of his nervous breakdown, by the end of his career, I think he represented sort of the exuberance and the joy of baseball as much as anything else.
Piersall remains painfully candid. In 1986, when he began broadcasting AAA Portland Beavers games, he described the tiny booth that peeked at the field through a chain-link fence. "This is great," he said with overbaked sarcasm. "I feel like I'm in a room in the sanitarium, only it had a better view. I'd like to see Vin Scully work in here. He'd give it up." One thing seems certain about Piersall: he would never give it up. Bad as it was, he'd already been through hell. For ESPN Classic Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.